The U.S. Marine Corps put his face on billboards to recruit soldiers. They called him a hero. But when his body started to rot in the jungle, suddenly nobody knew his name. Major James Capers was supposed to be erased, forgotten. But his story is too insane to stay buried. He was fighting two wars at once. One against communists in the jungle, one against racism in his own command. And he was winning both, until the government decided he was too dangerous to exist. This is the story of the man who refused to die. And before we drop into the kill zone with him, I have a mission for you. This story was hidden for 4 decades. Today, we are bringing it to the light. I want to know where you are watching this operation from. Whether you are in Detroit, London, Lagos, or a barracks in the middle of nowhere, drop your city in the comments below. Let's build a global perimeter for the ghost. To understand the monster that James Capers became, you have to look at the machine that built him. It wasn't the regular army. It wasn't the big green machine that drafted kids and sent them to die in rice paddies. This was force recon. In the Vietnam War, there were soldiers, there were Marines, and then there were the recon men. These were the psychopaths of the military. Their motto was swift, silent, deadly. They didn't capture hills. They didn't hold territory. They were the eyes of the beast. They operated deep behind enemy lines, in small teams of 4 or 5, swimming through swamps, crawling through tunnels, hunting the enemy in their own backyard. But James Capers wasn't satisfied with being elite. He wanted to be invisible. He was a force of nature. Born to a sharecropper in the Jim Crow South, he had learned early that the world wanted to break him. He escaped the cotton fields, joined the Marines, and realized that in the chaos of war, performance was the only thing that mattered. He didn't just pass the training, he destroyed it. He could run faster, shoot straighter, and move quieter than any white officer who looked down on him. When he arrived in Vietnam, he didn't form a normal platoon. He built a cult. He called it Team Broad-Minded. The name was a challenge. In 1966, the United States was tearing itself apart over race. Cities were burning. The KKK was marching. Black and white soldiers in the rear echelon were fighting each other in the bars of Saigon. But in Capers' team, there was no color. There was only the mission. He handpicked his men. He took the outcasts, the brawlers, the guys with attitude problems. He took white rednecks from Alabama and black kids from Harlem. He stripped them of their prejudices and rebuilt them as predators. Out here, he told them, bullets don't check your skin color. If you listen to me, you live. If you don't, you die. He trained them in arts that were forbidden in the regular manuals. He taught them to kill with a piece of wire. He taught them to walk through dry leaves without making a sound, a technique known as the recon glide. He taught them to slow their heart rates so they could lay underwater in a ditch for 10 minutes while an enemy patrol walked right over their heads. They didn't wear standard uniforms. They wore tiger stripes. They painted their faces black and green until they looked like demons. They carried unauthorized weapons, sawed-off shotguns, silenced pistols, Swedish K submachine guns used by the CIA, and they went hunting. The CIA loved Capers. The spooks in the air-conditioned trailers in Da Nang knew that if they needed a job done that was illegal, impossible, or suicidal, there was only one number to call. Get me the ghost. The missions were insane. On one occasion, Capers and his team were dropped into Laos, a country where the U.S. was officially not fighting. Their mission? To find a crashed B-57 bomber that was carrying top-secret electronic warfare gear. The Russians were looking for it. The Chinese were looking for it. Capers had to get there first. The terrain was vertical. The jungle was a triple canopy nightmare, blocking out the sun. Leeches dropped from the trees like rain. The NVA, North Vietnamese Army, had an entire regiment searching the area. Team Broad-Minded didn't walk. They flowed. They moved at night, using infrared strobes and hand signals. They found the crash site. They secured the intel. And then they realized they were surrounded. Most teams would have panicked. Most teams would have called for an emergency extraction, giving away their position. Capers did the opposite. He ordered his men to hold their fire. He waited. He let the enemy soldiers walk within inches of his position. He possessed a psychological discipline that was terrifying. He knew that the moment he pulled the trigger, the game changed. So he waited until he could smell the garlic on their breath. They slipped away like smoke. When the NVA finally swept the crash site, all they found were American boot prints that seemed to vanish into thin air. This was the birth of the legend. The NVA commanders began to report that they were fighting spirits. They would find their sentries dead with their throats cut, but no sign of a struggle. They would find their supply caches blown up, but no footprints leading to them. They put a price on Capers' head. They wanted the Black Phantom. But the greatest danger to Capers wasn't the NVA. It was the irony of his own existence. In 1967, the Marine Corps needed a win. The anti-war movement was growing. They needed to show that the war was noble, that the Marines were diverse and modern. They needed a poster boy. They looked at James Capers. He was handsome. He was articulate. He was a hero. He was black. They put his face on a recruiting poster. "Ask a Marine," the caption read. It was displayed in post offices and train stations across America. It was a lie. It showed a clean, smiling warrior. It didn't show the blood under his fingernails. It didn't show the secret orders from the CIA. It didn't show the fact that when Capers went back to the base, white officers refused to salute him because they couldn't stomach a black man with that much power. Capers lived a double life. To the public, he was a symbol of progress. To the enemy, he was the Grim Reaper. To his men, he was father. He loved his team with a ferocity that defied military protocol. He told them, "I will never leave you. If you die, I will carry your body out. If I die, you leave me and save yourselves." It was the only order they ever disobeyed. By the spring of 1967, the war was changing. The NVA was no longer just fighting a guerrilla war. They were massing for something big. The Tet Offensive was brewing, though the Americans didn't know it yet. The enemy was building massive bases in the deep jungle, fortresses hidden under the trees. The CIA picked up rumors of a massive staging area near Phu Loc, near the Laotian border. They suspected a regiment-sized force was preparing to overrun a Marine base. They needed confirmation. They needed coordinates for the B-52 bombers, but they couldn't see through the trees. They needed eyes on the ground. They needed a team to insert right on top of the enemy, count the numbers, and get out. The survival rate for a mission like this was estimated at 0%. It was a suicide run. The CIA handler looked at the map. He looked at the red circle around Phu Loc, and he made the call. Capers didn't flinch. He gathered Team Broad-Minded. He looked at their faces. Young men, some barely 20 years old, who trusted him more than they trusted God. "We're going in," he said. "It's going to be hot." They spent the night checking their gear, taping down their grenades so they wouldn't rattle, blacking out their faces, writing letters they hoped wouldn't be mailed. On April 3rd, 1967, they boarded the CH-46 Sea Knight helicopter. The rotors whipped the humid air into a frenzy. As they lifted off, Capers sat by the open door, his legs dangling over the edge. He held his M16 across his lap. He looked down at the green ocean of the jungle, a place of beauty and death. He didn't know it yet, but he was flying toward his destiny. He was flying toward the explosion that would rip his body apart, and the battle that would cement his name in the secret history of the 20th century. The Ghost was going to war. and he wasn't planning on coming back without a fight. The moment the skids of the CH-46 left the ground, leaving Team Broadminded standing in the elephant grass of Phu Loc, the world changed. The deafening thwack, thwack, thwack of the rotors faded into the distance, replaced by a silence that was heavier than the humid air. In Vietnam, silence is a lie. The jungle is never truly quiet. If the birds aren't singing and the insects aren't buzzing, it means a predator is near. And on that afternoon, the jungle was dead silent. Major James Capers signaled his men. No words were spoken. They didn't need them. They communicated with a twitch of a finger, a nod of the head. They slipped into the recon glide, rolling their feet from heel to toe to absorb the sound of crushing leaves. They became part of the landscape. Their mission was to find a suspected NVA base. But within an hour, Capers realized the intelligence reports were wrong. This wasn't a base. It was a fortress. They found trails, not the narrow game trails used by deer, but hard-packed highways cut through the jungle floor, wide enough for two men to walk abreast. The mud was churned by thousands of boot prints, Ho Chi Minh sandals. They found communication wires strung through the trees, black snakes carrying orders from Hanoi. They smelled the smoke of cooking fires. They weren't looking at a company-sized element. They had walked into the staging area of an entire North Vietnamese regiment. They were 10 men sitting in the middle of 3,000. The odds were mathematical suicide, but Capers didn't turn back. He was a Force Recon Marine. His job wasn't to survive. It was to verify. He pushed the team deeper. They moved like ghosts, crawling on their bellies through the undergrowth, getting close enough to hear the enemy soldiers talking. They counted the bunkers. They mapped the mortar pits. They were gathering the coordinates that would allow American air power to erase this place from the map. But the NVA knew they were there. The jungle has eyes, a broken branch, a shifted shadow. The NVA trackers were experts. They began to close the net. The birds stopped singing entirely. The air grew heavy with the static electricity of imminent violence. Capers sensed it. The sixth sense that keeps a recon man alive was screaming at him. He halted the patrol. He signaled for a defensive perimeter. And then the world turned white. It was a command-detonated claymore mine, rigged as a booby trap. It wasn't buried in the ground. It was strapped to a tree at chest height, facing the kill zone. When the NVA triggerman blew the charge, he unleashed a horizontal hailstorm of steel. Boom! The sound was not a noise. It was a physical blow that punched the air out of their lungs. The jungle shredded. Trees were sawed in half. James Capers was standing directly in the cone of fire. The blast lifted him off his feet and threw him backward into the mud. For a few seconds, there was nothing. No pain, no sound, just a ringing void. Then, the pain arrived. It hit him like a freight train. Capers looked down. His legs were destroyed. The blast had shattered both femurs. His boots were pointing in the wrong directions. His torso was riddled with shrapnel, 19 separate holes pumping blood into the dirt. His eardrums were perforated, leaving him in a muffled, underwater world. Any other man would have gone into shock. The brain, overwhelmed by massive trauma, usually shuts down the body to protect it. You pass out. You die. But James Capers' brain was wired differently. He saw the blood. He saw the bone. And a cold, hard switch flipped in his mind. Not today. He reached into his medical kit with trembling, bloody hands. He found the morphine syringes. He didn't wait for a corpsman. He slammed the needle into his own thigh, right through the fabric of his trousers. The drugs hit his system, dulling the razor edge of the agony just enough to let him think. He dragged himself into a sitting position. He grabbed his M16. He checked the chamber. He was a broken man, unable to stand, unable to run. But he was still the major. "Report!" he shouted, his voice sounding distant in his own ruined ears. The rest of the team was battered. Every man had taken shrapnel. His radio man was down. The NVA, sensing the kill, broke cover. They came screaming out of the tree line, AK-47s blazing, expecting to find a pile of corpses. They found Team Broad-Minded, and they found the ghost. Capers propped himself up against a tree stump. He couldn't walk, but he could shoot. He laid down a wall of automatic fire, dropping the lead attackers. His men, seeing their commander broken but fighting, rallied. They formed a tight circle around him. They threw grenades. They turned the ambush back on the ambushers. The firefight that followed was a descent into primal chaos. The NVA were closing in from three sides. They were tossing grenades. The air was thick with smoke and the smell of cordite and blood. Capers knew they were done. They were surrounded, outnumbered, and their leader was a cripple. There was no way out. But he also knew something else. He had the radio. He crawled to his radio man. He grabbed the handset. He called in fixed wing, air support, broken arrow, broken arrow. That is the code for a unit about to be overrun. It tells the pilots that there are no friendlies left to worry about, except the ones on the radio. It authorizes them to drop everything they have, right on top of the coordinates. High above the jungle, American Phantom jets peeled off. They screamed down, dropping napalm and high-explosive bombs dangerously close to Capers' position. The heat of the napalm sucked the oxygen out of the air. The ground shook. The NVA attack faltered as the jungle around them turned into an inferno. In the brief lull that followed the airstrike, Capers looked at his men. They were bleeding. They were terrified. They were looking at his legs, knowing that he couldn't walk. He made a decision. "Leave me," he ordered. "Get to the LZ. I'll hold them off." It was the standard logic of recon. If a man can't move, he stays behind to buy time for the team. It is the ultimate sacrifice. But Team Broad-Minded disobeyed. For the first and only time in their history, they ignored a direct order from the major. "We aren't leaving you, sir," one of the sergeants said. "We walk out together, or we die together." They grabbed him. Two men, bleeding themselves, hoisted the shattered body of James Capers up. They couldn't carry him on a stretcher. The jungle was too thick. They had to drag him, carry him, pass him over fallen logs. Every movement was agony. The broken bones in his legs ground together. He bit through his lip to keep from screaming, because a scream would give away their position. He kept his rifle in his hand, firing behind them as they retreated. They were moving toward a secondary landing zone, LZ, a small clearing a few clicks away. But the NVA were recovering. They were regrouping. They were coming after the blood trail. It became a running gun battle, a race between a team of wounded men carrying a cripple and a battalion of angry soldiers on their home turf. Capers, drifting in and out of consciousness from blood loss and morphine, kept commanding. "Watch the flank. Suppressing fire. Keep moving." He wasn't just a body to be carried. He was still the brain of the unit. He was navigating them through the fog of pain. They reached the clearing. It was tiny. Too small for a big chopper. But the call had gone out. A CH-46 was inbound. But the NVA were there too. They set up machine guns on the ridge overlooking the LZ. As the helicopter approached, tracers zipped through the air, bracketing the landing zone. The pilot radioed down. "LZ is too hot." "I can't set down!" Capers grabbed the radio. He didn't beg. He didn't plead. He spoke with the authority of a man who has already accepted death. "You come down and get my men," he growled, "or I will shoot you down myself." It was a bluff. Or maybe it wasn't. But the pilot heard the steel in the voice. He dove the chopper. He ignored the tracers. He hovered just feet above the tall grass, the rotor wash flattening the vegetation. The Marines threw Capers on board. They piled in after him. The floor of the helicopter became a slick of blood. As the bird lifted off, taking rounds in the fuselage, James Capers lay on the metal floor. He looked out the back ramp. He saw the jungle receding. He saw the NVA soldiers breaking into the clearing, firing uselessly at the sky. He checked his team. Everyone was on board. Everyone was alive. He looked down at his legs. They were mangled ruins. He knew his war was over. He knew he would never run through the woods again. He knew the ghost was dead, but the man was alive. He closed his eyes. The adrenaline crashed. The darkness finally took him. But James Capers didn't die on that helicopter. He survived the flight. He survived the surgery. He survived the amputation discussion. He fought to keep his legs and won, though he would live in pain forever. He had survived the suicide mission, but he was about to face a new enemy. An enemy that didn't use claymores or AK-47s. He was coming home to America. And America in 1967 was a place where a black hero was not welcomed with parades. He was about to find out that the country he had bled for, the country that had used his face to sell the war, was not ready to honor his sacrifice. His file was stamped top secret. His silver star was awarded in quiet. The world was told nothing. For 40 years, James Capers would live in the shadows, a cripple with a secret, watching as lesser men were called heroes. The war didn't end when the helicopter lifted off. It just changed venues. For Major James Capers, the jungle of Vietnam was replaced by the antiseptic white walls of the Naval Hospital in Bethesda, Maryland. The noise of the firefight was replaced by the hum of fluorescent lights and the rhythmic beeping of monitors. But the pain followed him home. When Capers finally woke up from the haze of surgery and morphine, he looked down at the ruin of his body. The doctors had done their best. They had stitched up the 19 holes in his torso. They had repaired his perforated eardrums. But his legs were a catastrophe. The bones had been shattered so thoroughly that the x-rays looked like a jigsaw puzzle dropped on the floor. The medical opinion was unanimous and brutal: amputation. The doctors told him that he would never walk again without prosthetics. They said the damage was too extensive, the infection risk too high. They prepared the paperwork. To them, it was a medical necessity. To Capers, it was a surrender. And James Capers did not know how to surrender. He lay in that bed, his body broken, but his mind as sharp as a diamond, and he issued his first order of the new war. "You are not taking my legs." It was a battle of wills. The doctors argued logic. Capers argued faith. He told them he would walk. He told them he would run. He told them that he had walked out of an NVA kill zone on broken femurs, so he could certainly walk out of a hospital. He refused to sign the consent forms. He fought the surgeons with the same ferocity he had fought the North Vietnamese. Eventually, the doctors relented. They pinned the bones. They cast him in plaster from his chest to his toes. They told him, "Fine, keep them, but they will be useless." They underestimated the ghost. The rehabilitation was a torture chamber. Imagine trying to teach muscles that have been shredded by shrapnel how to fire again. Imagine putting weight on bones that have been pulverized. Every step was a scream. Capers spent months in that hospital, sweating, grunting, forcing his body to obey his mind. He didn't just want to walk. He wanted to be a Marine again. But while he fought for his physical recovery, a different kind of amputation was taking place. A bureaucratic one. Men in suits came to visit his bedside. They weren't there to give him medals. They were there to give him orders. They were from the intelligence agencies. They closed the door. They spoke in low voices. "Major," they said, "the mission at Phu Loc." It never happened. This is the reality of Black Ops. The mission had crossed lines, perhaps borders into Laos, perhaps operational mandates that the US government couldn't admit to. The target was classified. The methods were classified. To acknowledge the battle was to admit that the U.S. was operating where it said it wasn't. So, the file was stamped top secret. Capers was told to keep his mouth shut. He couldn't tell his wife what had happened. He couldn't tell the press. He couldn't even tell other Marines. The heroism of Team Broad-Minded, the refusal to leave him behind, the firefight against a battalion, the Broken Arrow airstrike was erased. It vanished into the CIA's archives. For the men of his team, this was a bitter pill. They had bled. Some had died. And now they were told that their sacrifice didn't exist. They received generic citations, vague references to action against enemy forces. But the true story was buried. They were heroes in the dark. And then came the irony that would define Capers' life for the next decade. While he lay in his hospital bed, unable to walk, his face was staring down from billboards across the United States. The Marine Corps' Ask a Marine campaign was in full swing. It was one of the most successful recruitment drives in history. The image of James Capers, strong, handsome, the epitome of the warrior, was convincing thousands of young men to sign up for the war. He was the poster boy. He was the symbol of the modern integrated Marine Corps. He was the proof that a black man could be a leader. But the reality of his life was a stark contradiction to the poster. He was a crippled black man in an America that was tearing itself apart over race. 1. The year Capers was recovering. Martin Luther King Jr. was assassinated. Cities went up in flames. The very country Capers had sacrificed his legs for was exploding in racial violence. He watched the news from his hospital room. He saw troops, National Guard troops, patrolling American streets. He had to reconcile two warring truths. He was a patriot who loved the Corps, and he was a black man in a country that murdered its black leaders. He was the face of the establishment on the billboard and the victim of the establishment in the streets. When he was finally discharged from the hospital, walking with canes, he didn't retire. He went back to work. He stayed in the Marines. He forced himself to meet the physical standards. He served in Special Operations Commands. He mentored young Marines. But he carried the secret of Phu Loc like a stone in his chest. The 1970s passed. The war in Vietnam ended in a messy, painful withdrawal. The country turned its back on the veterans. They were spat on. They were called baby killers. Capers saw the men he had led, the men of Team Broad-Minded, drift into civilian life, carrying the trauma without the recognition. They were the silent professionals. They didn't write books. They didn't go on talk shows. They quietly suffered the nightmares. Capers suffered too. The shrapnel in his body never really stopped hurting. The ringing in his ears never stopped. But the worst pain was the silence. He knew what his men had done. He knew they deserved the Medal of Honor. He knew they deserved to be known. But the oath he had sworn to keep the secret was binding. He was a Marine. He followed orders, even the orders that broke his heart. He rose to the rank of major. He retired in 1978. He became a civilian, but retirement didn't bring peace. It brought obscurity. To his neighbors, he was just a quiet man with a limp. They didn't know he was the ghost. They didn't know he was the man who had hunted generals in the jungle. The world moved on. The Cold War thawed. The Berlin Wall fell. The secrets of the Vietnam era began to lose their potency. And then, in the early 2000s, something changed. The government began a massive declassification effort. Millions of pages of documents from the Vietnam War were reviewed. The CIA, the Pentagon, the National Archives, they started to open the vaults. Among those documents was the file on Team Broad-Minded. The top secret stamp was crossed out. The redactions were lifted. The story of Phu Loc, of the B-57 recovery, of the prisoner snatches, it all came tumbling out into the light. It was a revelation. Military historians looked at the reports and were stunned. They realized that this wasn't just a good unit. This was arguably the most effective force recon team in the history of the war. They realized that James Capers wasn't just a poster boy. He was a tactical genius. The silence was broken. But now came the hard part. Recognition. You can declassify a file with a stamp, but you can't undo 40 years of neglect with a stamp. The men of Team Broad-Minded were old now. Some were dead. The window for medals, for parades, for thank yous had closed for many of them. But James Capers was still alive. The man who refused to die in the jungle refused to die in retirement. He was in his 70s, blind in one eye, his body a map of scar tissue, but his spirit was untouched. A movement began. Initiated by fellow Marines, supported by generals who had served as lieutenants in Vietnam, a campaign was launched to get Major Capers the Medal of Honor. They argued that his actions at Phu Loc, continuing to command while mortally wounded, calling in airstrikes on his own position to save his men, organizing the evacuation while refusing to leave, were the definition of conspicuous gallantry. They gathered the witness statements. They reconstructed the battle. They sent the package to the Pentagon. And then the waiting began again. The bureaucracy of the Medal of Honor is a slow, grinding machine. It is political. It is cautious. And, as we have seen with the Buffalo Soldiers and the 320th Battalion, it has a long history of being blind to black heroism. Capers waited. He didn't beg. He didn't complain. He sat in his home, surrounded by photos of his team, and he waited for his country to make up its mind. In 2010, he received a call. It wasn't the Medal of Honor. It was the Silver Star. The Silver Star is the third highest military decoration for valor. It is a tremendous honor. But to many who knew the story, it felt like a compromise. It felt like the government saying, "We acknowledge you were brave, but we aren't ready to call you the bravest." Capers accepted it. He stood at the ceremony, leaning on his cane, his chest heavy with ribbons. He accepted it not for himself, but for Team Broad-Minded. He accepted it for the men who had carried him through the jungle. But the fight wasn't over. The Silver Star was just the opening shot in the battle for his legacy. Because as the story of the Ghost spread, a new generation of warriors began to pay attention. The modern Force Recon Marines, the Navy SEALs, the MARSOC Raiders, they looked at the operational history of James Capers and they saw their father. They saw the inventor of the tactics they use today. To the young men who join the Marine Corps today, the candidates sweating in the sand of buds or the recruits at Paris Island, Major James Capers is not a man. He is a myth. He is a fable told in the barracks to explain what a Marine is supposed to be. When modern operators in MARSOC, Marine Special Operations Command, put on their gear and head into the dark places of the world, they are walking in footprints left by James Capers 50 years ago. He is the godfather of the modern recon community. The tactics he developed in the jungle, the silent communication, the small unit autonomy, the psychological warfare, are now standard doctrine. He proved that a small team of highly trained, diverse warriors could paralyze an entire enemy regiment. He proved that the mind is a deadlier weapon than the rifle. But while the military studied his tactics, they ignored his tragedy. James Capers survived the Claymore mine. He survived the NVA. He survived the racism of the 1960s. But he could not survive the water at Camp Lejeune. This is the darkest chapter of the Capers story, and it is the one that makes his continued patriotism so confounding and so heartbreaking. After the war, Capers was stationed at Camp Lejeune in North Carolina. It was the home of the Marine Corps. It was supposed to be the safest place on Earth for a Marine and his family. But for decades, the groundwater at the base was contaminated with toxic chemicals, industrial solvents, benzene, and carcinogens. The Marine Corps knew about it. The government knew about it. But they didn't fix it, and they didn't tell the families living in the base housing. James Capers drank that water. His wife Dottie drank that water. His son Gary drank that water. The enemy didn't come with a gun. It came from the kitchen tap. Dottie Capers, the woman who had waited for him through the tours in Vietnam, the woman who had nursed him back to health when his legs were shattered, developed cancer. She fought it with the same grace she had fought the segregation of the South, but it withered her. She died, leaving James alone. But the cruelest blow landed on his son. Gary Capers was born blind and suffered from a congenital heart defect. For years, James watched his son struggle. He watched the boy fight for every breath. He dedicated his post-retirement life to caring for Gary. The man who had hunted generals in the jungle became a tender nurse, feeding his son, bathing him, being his eyes in a world of darkness. Gary died in 2003. He was 49 years old, but his body had been broken since birth. When the truth about the Camp Lejeune water contamination finally came out, it shattered James Capers. He realized that the government he had served so faithfully had poisoned his family. The shrapnel in his own body was an honorable wound of war. The poison in his wife and son was a dishonorable wound of negligence. Imagine the rage. Imagine the sense of betrayal. Most men would have turned against the flag. They would have burned their uniform. They would have spent the rest of their lives cursing the United States Marine Corps. James Capers did not. He grieved. He wept. But he remained a Marine. He forgave the institution, even while he held the bureaucracy accountable. He continued to speak to young Marines. He continued to wear the eagle, globe, and anchor. This is a level of stoicism that borders on the superhuman. It forces us to ask, what is loyalty? Is it blind obedience? Or is it a commitment to an ideal so strong that not even the sins of the state can break it? Capers believed in the ideal of the Marine Corps, the brotherhood, the honor, the sacrifice, even when the reality of the Marine Corps failed him. And while he was burying his family, a new battle was forming around him, the battle for the Medal of Honor. The Silver Star he received in 2010 was an admission that he was a hero. But to the men who served with him, and to the generals who studied his file, it was insufficient. The Silver Star is for gallantry in action. The Medal of Honor is for conspicuous gallantry and intrepidity at the risk of life above and beyond the call of duty. Look at the facts of Phu Loc again. He was mortally wounded, 19 times. His legs were useless. He was deafened. Yet, he refused medical evacuation. He controlled a chaotic firefight against a numerically superior force. He called Broken Arrow on his own position, essentially ordering the Air Force to bomb him to kill the enemy. He organized an extraction under fire, and he refused to get on the helicopter until every single one of his men was aboard. If that isn't above and beyond, the phrase has no meaning. So why the delay? Why the hesitation? The answer is complex. Part of it is the classification. Because the mission was black, off the books, possibly across the border. The Army is hesitant to fully acknowledge the details even today. To give him the Medal of Honor is to shine a massive spotlight on a CIA operation that technically never happened. Part of it is the lingering bias of the system. The Medal of Honor review boards are conservative. They rely on contemporaneous evidence, paperwork filed in 1967. But because of the secrecy and the chaos, the original paperwork for Capers was sparse. The top secret stamp acted as a barrier to the truth. But the biggest factor might simply be inertia. It is hard to get a government to admit it was wrong twice. First about the secrecy, and second about the award. In recent years, the campaign to upgrade his medal has reached the highest levels. General James Mattis, the former Secretary of Defense, and a Marine legend in his own right, has championed capers. Congressmen have filed bills, petitions have circulated. There is a growing sense of urgency. Major Capers is in his late 80s. He is legally blind now. A cruel irony for a man who made his living with his eyes. He moves slowly. The pain in his legs never went away. He wants the medal, not for his ego. He wants it because it belongs to Team Broadminded. He wants it because it validates the men who died in the jungle. He wants it because it proves that a black man from the Jim Crow South can be the greatest warrior in American history. He sits in his home in North Carolina, surrounded by memories. The shadows of Dottie and Gary are there. The ghosts of his team are there. He is the last watchman. There is a documentary about him called Major Capers, The Legend of Team Broadminded. In it, you see an old man with a gentle voice. He doesn't sound like a killer. He sounds like a grandfather. But then you look at his eyes. Even behind the dark glasses he wears, you can see the steel. You can see the man who told a helicopter pilot, "Come down or I'll shoot you down." He is the living embodiment of the complicated relationship between black Americans and the military. He gave everything. He took the pain. He lost his family. And he is still waiting for his country to say, "Thank you," with the full weight of its gratitude. The 2020s have brought a racial reckoning to America. We are taking down statues of Confederate traitors. We are renaming bases that were named after men who fought to preserve slavery. Fort Bragg is now Fort Liberty. In this climate, the story of James Capers is not just a military story. It is a political imperative. He is the anti-Confederate. He is the black hero who actually fought for the United States. To deny him the Medal of Honor while we are tearing down statues of Robert E. Lee is a contradiction we cannot afford. As we approach the end of this saga, we have to look at the man himself one last time. He is frail now. The body that survived 19 wounds is yielding to time. But the spirit is untouched. He says he has no regrets. He says he would do it all again. "I am a Marine," he says. That's what we do. But we, the public, should have regrets. We should regret that he had to wait this long. We should regret that he had to mourn his wife and son alone. We should regret that for 40 years, we let a hero think he was forgotten. James Capers sits in his home today, and the world is fading. He is legally blind. The eyes that once spotted NVA ambushes from 100 yards away, the eyes that guided helicopters into hot landing zones, the eyes that became the literal eyes of the Marine Corps in Vietnam, have failed him. He lives in a world of shadows now, but in the darkness, his memory is 2020. He remembers the faces of the men he killed. He remembers the faces of the men he saved. And he remembers the promise he made to himself when he formed Team Broadminded. Excellence is the only currency. We need to stop and really understand what Capers built in the jungle. It wasn't just a combat unit. It was a social experiment that succeeded where America was failing. In 1967, back in the world, the U.S., black and white people were fighting in the streets. Detroit was burning. Newark was burning. The racial divide was a canyon. But in the jungle, Capers bridged that canyon with survival. He took white soldiers from the Deep South, men raised on segregation, and told them, "I am your commander. I am black, and I am the only thing standing between you and a body bag." He didn't demand their love. He demanded their competence. And when they saw him work, when they saw him track a man by the bent grass, when they saw him call in an airstrike within meters of their position without flinching, the racism evaporated. It didn't disappear because of a lecture. It disappeared because of respect. Capers proved that diversity wasn't just a moral good. It was a tactical weapon. A team that trusts each other blindly is deadlier than a team distracted by hate. Team Broad-Minded became the most lethal unit in Force Recon because they were a single organism. They moved as one. They breathed as one. This is the legacy that the modern Special Forces community studies. When you look at the Navy SEALs or the Green Berets today, you see the DNA of Team Broad-Minded. Capers was the architect of the small unit tactics that define modern warfare. He taught the military that a handful of men, if they are the right men, can stop an army. But the architect was forced to live in a house that didn't want him. For decades after the war, Capers carried the burden of the classified stamp. Imagine the psychological isolation. You are a hero. You have done things that would make a Captain America movie look tame. But you cannot tell a soul. You go to a bar, and civilians ask you what you did in the war. You have to say, I was in supply. You have to lie. You have to swallow your pride while others brag about battles that were half as dangerous as your average Tuesday. This silence is a corrosive acid. It eats at the soul. It makes you question your own reality. Did it happen? Did I really survive that? Or am I crazy? And then, the final insult, the erasure. Because his missions were secret, they weren't in the history books. When Vietnam movies like Platoon or Apocalypse Now came out, Capers didn't see himself. He saw a Hollywood version of the war, where black soldiers were often portrayed as drug addicts, victims, or angry militants. He didn't see the professionals. He didn't see the strategists. He didn't see Team Broad-Minded. The culture had stolen his narrative. This is why the fight for the Medal of Honor is so critical. It isn't about a piece of metal hanging on a ribbon. It is about correcting the official record. It is about forcing the United States government to admit, in writing, that a black man was the apex predator of the Vietnam War. The current status of his award, the Silver Star, is noble, but it is insufficient. The Silver Star is for heroism. The Medal of Honor is for conspicuous gallantry, at the risk of life above and beyond the call of duty. Let's review the call of duty. The call of duty is to fight. The call of duty is to lead. James Capers fought with broken legs. He led while bleeding to death. He ordered an airstrike on his own head. He refused evacuation until his men were safe. That is not the call of duty. That is a rejection of biology. That is a rejection of self-preservation. That is the definition of above and beyond. If James Capers had been a white officer in World War II, playing by the rules of the greatest generation, he would be a household name. He would have schools named after him. He would be in the history textbooks next to Audie Murphy. But because he was a black officer in an unpopular war, fighting on secret missions, he was allowed to fade. And now he is old. The sand in the hourglass is running out. The Pentagon has a history of waiting until heroes die to honor them. It's easier that way. Dead heroes don't give interviews. Dead heroes don't remind you of the water contamination that killed their families. Dead heroes are safe symbols. James Capers is inconveniently alive, and he is still fighting. He fights the darkness of his blindness every day. He navigates his home by memory, just as he navigated the jungle. He fights the grief of losing his wife and son, the collateral damage of his service. And he fights for his men. Every time he speaks to a journalist, every time he meets with a general, he lists the names of Team Broad-Minded. He deflects the glory. It wasn't me, he says. It was us. This humility is the final proof of his greatness. A man who demands glory usually doesn't deserve it. A man who tries to give it away is the one you should listen to. As we approach the end of this story, we have to ask ourselves, what is our role in this? We are the jury. The government may control the medals, but we control the memory. If we let James Capers die as a footnote, then we are complicit in the erasure. If we let the algorithm bury this story, we are no better than the officers who stamped his file secret. The story of the ghost is a test. It tests our willingness to look at the ugly parts of our history, the racism, the poisoned water, the secret wars, and still find the beauty in the man who survived them. James Capers is the diamond in the coal mine of the Vietnam War. He is the proof that honor can exist in a dishonorable conflict. In the final block, we will issue the ultimate call to action. We will not ask for sympathy. We will ask for a roar. We will demand that the name James Capers be raised to the pantheon of American Titans. We will look at the specific steps being taken right now to upgrade his medal and how you can help. The jungle is far behind us. The hospital is behind us. The courtroom is behind us. Now, we stand on the steps of history. The door is locked. But James Capers taught us that if the door is locked, you kick it down. We are about to kick it down. The final block is the salute, and it is the loudest sound we can make. Major James Capers sits in his living room in North Carolina. The room is quiet. The curtains are drawn, though it doesn't matter much to him anymore. The blindness that has claimed his sight is total. He lives in a world of permanent midnight. But do not make the mistake of thinking he is in the dark. Inside his mind, the jungle is still green. The faces of Team Broadminded are still young, frozen in the amber of 1967. He can still see the trail at Phu Loc. He can still see the fear and the love in the eyes of the men who dragged his shattered body through the mud. The visual world has left him, but the vision remains. He is the last watchman. As we close the book on the legend of the ghost, we are left with a question that weighs heavy on the soul of America. What makes a man fight for a country that is fighting against him? James Capers enlisted when black men were being lynched for trying to vote. He fought in Vietnam while his own people were burning in the streets of Detroit. He returned to a Marine Corps that poisoned his wife and son with toxic water. By any rational metric, he should be a bitter man. He should hate the flag. He should curse the uniform. But he doesn't. When you ask him about the Corps, he straightens his back. He speaks of semper fi, always faithful. He didn't serve the racism. He served the ideal. He served the man next to him. He understood that America is not a finished product. It is a project. And he decided that his contribution to that project would be excellence. He would force the country to be better by being the best thing in it. This is the ultimate victory of James Capers. The NVA couldn't kill him with mines. The CIA couldn't erase him with secrecy. And the racism of the era couldn't corrupt his heart. He remained fundamentally a Marine. But while he has made his peace, we, the public, cannot afford to be so forgiving. We have a debt to pay. The Medal of Honor is not just a piece of gold and blue ribbon. It is the nation's conscience. It is the official record of what we value. When we deny it to a man like Capers, we are saying that his sacrifice was enough, but not supreme. We are saying that a black man leading a suicide mission, saving his team while mortally wounded, and changing the doctrine of modern warfare is just doing his job. That is a lie, and it is a lie that needs to be corrected while he is still here to hear it. There is a clock ticking in North Carolina. James Capers is in his late 80s. He is frail. The body that absorbed 19 wounds is tired. Every day that the Pentagon delays, every day that a review board studies the file, is a gamble that he will die before the president can put that medal around his neck. We have seen this happen before. We saw it with the Buffalo Soldiers. We saw it with the Wereth 11. We saw it with Waverly Woodson. We wait until they are ghosts, and then we build monuments. We cannot let James Capers become a ghost again. He has already been one for too long. The legacy of Team Broadminded is not just in the past. it is in the present. Every time a Navy SEAL team executes a silent insertion, they are using the playbook Capers wrote. Every time a diverse unit of Marines trusts each other with their lives, they are living out the broad-minded philosophy. He proved that diversity is not wokeness. It is a force multiplier. He proved that a team built on talent and brotherhood is deadlier than a team built on segregation. He is the godfather of the modern warrior. So, what are your orders? If you have watched this story, you are now read in. You have the clearance. You know the secret that the CIA tried to hide. You know that the face on the Ask a Marine poster was not just a model. He was the most dangerous man in the valley. You have a duty to carry this intelligence. The history books are still being written. Wikipedia pages can be edited. Congressmen can be called. The algorithm can be forced to pay attention. Share this video. Send it to the veterans you know. Send it to the history teachers. Send it to the people who think they know everything about the Vietnam War, but have never heard the name Capers. Tell them about the man who injected morphine into his own leg and kept shooting. Tell them about the man who told the helicopter pilot, "Come down or I'll shoot you down." Tell them about the man who broke the color barrier in the most elite fraternity on Earth. And finally, I have one last request. A final signal flare for the Ghost. We need to show the algorithm, the Pentagon, and the world that James Capers has an army behind him. We need to show that his perimeter is secure. Go to the comments section right now. I want you to type the name that struck terror into the enemy and brought hope to his men. Type the Ghost. Let's fill the comments with a wall of respect. Let's make the name James Capers trend. Let's show the Major that even in the darkness of his blindness, he is seen. Major James Capers Jr., USMC, RET. You have held the line for 80 years. You have carried the weight of the secret, the weight of the grief, and the weight of the glory. You are the best of us. The mission is not over until the medal is home. But for now, you can rest. We have the watch. Thank you for watching. Keep the faith. Keep fighting. And never leave a man behind. Dismissed.